The hum comes first. That soft, uneven, mechanical with it anyone who's ever touched a VHS player remembers. The sound of plastic reels turning somewhere inside a black plastic shell. It's faint at first, like the purring of an animal just out of sight, but then it fills the room. The screen is black, but not empty. Faint specks drift across it, tiny flecks of light like snow falling in reverse. A voice, yours, the narrator's, enters quietly, almost a whisper. In 1995, in a town you've probably never heard of, a young woman disappeared. There were no signs of struggle. No witnesses. No one saw her leave the gathering she was attending. But someone caught something on tape. The screen flickers. The sound changes. The whirring slows, then speeds up, a mechanical inhale before the moment it breathes out the past. Then the first image appears. Washed out daylight, the faded blue of an August sky. The camera shakes slightly, as though held in the hands of someone and used to filming. A child's laugh cuts through the static. Somewhere in the background, the buzz of cicadas fills the air. It's a memory preserved in rust and magnets. For a moment it feels warm. Harmless. You can almost smell the grass, dry and sunbaked. But then, as the image jitters, a strange ripple runs across the frame. It's not a glitch, not exactly. More like the air inside the picture trembles. The people in the shot keep moving, keep laughing, but for a fraction of a second, their outlines blur as though something else is pushing through. Then the flicker happens. It's barely half a second. So quick you could blink and miss it. But if you slow the footage down, if you let the tape drag its teeth over the playback heads, you see it. The scene changes without warning. A different place entirely. The warmth of the yard and birthday chatter vanish, replaced by a dim, narrow hallway. The camera is tilted, the floor visible in the bottom corner of the frame. And in the middle of it, a face. It's close to the lens, too close, the edges of its features bleeding into distortion. The eyes are dark, but not in shadow, as if the black is inside them, deeper than pupils should allow. The mouth isn't moving, but something about the set of the lips feels wrong. You can't place it, yet you feel it in your stomach. The skin is pale, not with the softness of light, but with the flatness of a printed photograph. It doesn't look like anyone from the party. In fact, it doesn't look like anyone at all. Not familiar, not recognizable, but undeniably human. And then static. A hard, sharp buzz. The image shatters into lines of noise. The narrator breathes. No one at the gathering knew who that man was. And no one could explain how he ended up on the tape. That was the last second before the recording ended, and the last time anyone saw her. The frame freezes on the last clear image before the static. The colors are faintly wrong, the skin a shade too gray, the eyes catching light in a way real eyes don't. In the corner of the frame, behind the blurred edge of his face, there's the faintest suggestion of another figure. But the tape is too degraded to tell. Could be a shadow. Could be her. The sound design here lingers. The kind of silence that isn't really silence. A low, almost inaudible hum, like a refrigerator in another room. The type of quiet that presses on your eardrums. You pull the audience closer. This tape would sit in an attic for almost 2 decades before it was found again. By then, the town had moved on. The party was a faint memory. And the girl. She was a ghost story parents whispered to their children. The camera in the footage had one of those small plastic date stamps in the corner. The numbers glow orange against the faded footage. August 12, 1995, 4:22 p.m. It's a timestamp you'll see again and again in this story, because nothing after it made sense. Not the search. Not the reports. And certainly not the face that shouldn't have been there. In the documentary's visual flow, this section ends with the VHS ejecting from the player in slow motion. The tape reels visible through its small window. Dust motes drift through the air as the case clicks into the narrator's hands. We don't yet know what's inside, the why of it all, but we've seen enough to understand one thing. This isn't a normal disappearance. The last line before the section fades. If you watch something enough times, you start to see patterns. But in this case, the more we watched, the less it felt like the tape was showing us the past. It felt like it was showing us something waiting. If you look at a map, You might miss it entirely. A cluster of streets wrapped around a small river bend. 2 churches, 1 diner, a library that still smelled faintly of the 1970s. The kind of place where everyone knew the sound of everyone else's car engine, where a single unfamiliar face at the gas station could stir whispered conversations for a week. It was the summer of 1995, the kind of summer that felt endless when you were young. The days were thick with heat, the air carrying the scent of cut grass and river water. The kind of heat that slowed time, not laziness exactly, but a kind of quiet contentment. The sky seemed wider here. Even the sunsets felt unhurried. On Main Street, wind chimes rattled on shaded porches. The neon open sign at Marla's Diner flickered through the afternoon glare. If you walked down toward the river, you could hear a radio from someone's garage, the announcer's voice carrying over the steady crackle of the AM signal. This was a town where doors were left unlocked, where the mailman knew who had recently broken their wrist and which family had just gotten a new puppy. Trouble felt like something that belonged in other places. Big cities, distant headlines. Here, trouble moved slowly, if at all. The girl at the center of our story, the one who would vanish, fit into this world so seamlessly, it was hard to picture her anywhere else. Her name was spoken lightly, warmly. She had a way of talking with her hands, her wrists moving like she was tracing invisible patterns in the air. She wasn't the loudest in the room, but when she laughed, it was with her whole face. People remembered her smile the way they remembered the first fireflies of summer. Her younger brother, just 16 at the time, was the quiet shadow in her orbit. He noticed things others didn't, the way her hair caught light in the late afternoon, the way she tilted her head when listening to someone, the way her voice softened when she didn't trust the person speaking to her. Years later, he would recall these moments in fragments, trying to find meaning where there might have been none. Then there was the neighbor, an older man named Harold, who lived 2 houses down. Retired, curious, with a fondness for technology just advanced enough to be impressive for a man his age. He had a camcorder. Not the bulky kind with a shoulder mount, but one of the newer handheld models, compact and heavy in the palm. He filmed everything. Parades, fishing trips, sunsets, even the way rain pooled on the sidewalks. People teased him for it, but no one minded being in his videos. Harold had a knack for catching people in their best light. That's why he brought the camera to the birthday party. The party was small. Just family, a few close friends, and a scattering of neighbors. There were folding chairs in the backyard, paper streamers twisting in the breeze, a table layered with mismatched plates of potato salad, deviled eggs, and bright red punch in a glass bowl. Someone had baked a cake that leaned slightly to one side. No one cared. It was the kind of gathering where imperfections felt charming. If you'd been there, you might have noticed how the town seemed to fold in on itself during events like this. Conversations braided together, children wove in and out of clusters of adults, and the old elm tree by the fence cast a shade that pulled people into its reach. Harold's camera would have drifted lazily from one scene to another, framing them all like little living portraits. A woman adjusting her sunglasses, a boy balancing on one foot, an elderly couple holding hands without thinking about it. The missing woman spent most of the day near that elm tree, laughing, sipping from a paper cup, and brushing strands of hair out of her eyes. Every so often she'd glance toward the street beyond the fence, just quick looks, the kind that don't draw attention unless you're already watching for them. Her brother noticed once or twice but didn't ask. Years later, he would replay that detail in his mind more times than he could count. This was a place where time seemed to stretch. Afternoons slid into evenings without anyone noticing. The hum of cicadas grew louder as the sun softened, and the light took on that syrupy gold that makes even the most ordinary scene feel like it belongs to a story. If there was danger coming, it was far enough away that no one could smell it in the air. And maybe that's the cruelest part. Because when the day was over, when the last paper plate had been thrown away and the folding chairs had been stacked, no one thought they had witnessed the beginning of anything. They thought they'd just attended a birthday party. They thought tomorrow would be the same. The town, in its stillness, had been carrying the weight of what was about to happen without knowing it. A single reel of tape was already holding the proof. But at the time, no one saw it coming. No one saw him coming. The tape begins without fanfare, a shaky shot of the grass under Harold's shoes as he adjusts the camcorder. The image tilts upward slowly, catching the flutter of paper streamers in the breeze. They twist in lazy arcs, throwing thin shadows across the folding tables beneath them. The air carries the mixed scents of barbecue smoke, sunscreen, and the faint tang of river water drifting in from the edge of town. The camera lingers on the elm tree first. Its trunk is thick and weathered, its canopy spilling over the yard like a green umbrella. Beneath it, the birthday table waits, a cake with pale yellow frosting, its edges uneven where the heat has begun to soften them. A single row of unlit candles leans like soldiers at rest. Conversations overlap in the background. A woman's laugh rings out, bright and unguarded. Somewhere, ice clinks against the sides of a glass pitcher. The tone is casual, warm, the kind of moment most people wouldn't think twice about preserving. But Harold's camera makes it feel intentional, almost staged, like the day is aware it's being recorded. The missing woman appears at 1 minute and 14 seconds into the footage. She's standing just off to the side of the table, her paper cup held loosely in one hand, the other brushing her hair back from her face. The sunlight catches the fine strands, turning them almost gold. She smiles at someone just outside the frame, her eyes crinkling at the corners, her head tilting slightly in that way her brother would remember years later. Harold doesn't zoom in. He never does. His style is to let the scene breathe. So she remains part of the larger picture, a figure among friends and neighbors, her presence soft but distinct. She laughs once, the sound faint through the camera's built-in microphone, and turns toward the street beyond the fence. It's only for a second, but her smile falters, a blink maybe, a pause too small to call a reaction. Then she's back, engaged in conversation, sipping her drink. The footage cuts briefly, an innocent splice where Harold likely stopped the tape to conserve space. When it returns, children are darting in and out of the yard, their shouts high and playful. A boy chases a girl with a dripping popsicle, and in the background, a group of adults debates whether the river level is higher this summer. Normal, everyday noise. But something in the camera's movement changes. It drifts almost absently toward the street. Through the slats of the wooden fence, the lens catches a strip of asphalt and the shadow of something passing by. A person, perhaps. The blur of motion is too quick to define. Harold seems not to notice. The shot tilts back toward the guests. The birthday song comes next. Off-key, but earnest. The missing woman leans forward to light the candles, the match's flame wavering in the slight breeze. She glances over her shoulder mid-song, again toward the street. It's subtle enough that most viewers wouldn't think twice, but the pattern is there. She's looking for something. Or at someone. Her younger brother is in the frame now, standing just behind her. His eyes, unlike hers, aren't on the cake. They're scanning the yard, not urgently, not yet, but in that absent way people do when something's pressing in the back of their mind. The candles go out in one breath. Applause. The knife cuts into the frosting, and the first slice falls onto a paper plate. Harold moves through the crowd, catching snippets of chatter. The fishing's been good this year. Heard they're repaving the road next month. Marla's got a new pie recipe. The details are ordinary, almost painfully so. And that's what makes what comes later so much harder to reconcile. Because nothing here feels dangerous. As Harold pans past the elm tree again, a small lens flare blooms across the image. It lands briefly on the woman's face, making her expression hard to read. But if you pause the tape, and people have endlessly, you can see her eyes aren't following Harold's movement. They're fixed on a point far behind him. It's here the footage wavers slightly, a faint warping in the color. The whites of shirts take on a faint green hue, and the shadows under the tree darken as though the sun dipped behind a cloud. But the audio remains bright. Laughter, clinking plates, the shuffle of feet on grass. The section closes with an almost throwaway shot, Harold lowering the camera to his side, the frame catching only knees and feet as people mill around. The tape continues to run, capturing fragments of conversation and the sound of a car engine starting somewhere nearby. You can't see it, but the missing woman's voice drifts faintly into the mic, a single sentence spoken so quietly it's nearly drowned out. I didn't think he'd come back. Then the image jerks up again, the focus snapping to a child holding a balloon. The moment is gone, buried under the noise of the day. For nearly 20 years, the tape sat in a box. The cardboard edges softened with humidity, the black plastic shell gathering a skin of dust. It was buried under board games with missing pieces, tangled Christmas lights, and a shoebox full of photographs that no one had framed. It wasn't until the summer of 2014 that the missing woman's brother found it again. He was cleaning out their late parents' attic, a job he'd put off for months. The air was dry and heavy with the smell of insulation, and the sunlight through the one small window turned the dust motes into slow golden snow. He found the box in the far corner, behind a stack of water-stained National Geographic magazines. The handwriting on the lid was in his mother's slanted script: Home, Parties, Misc. Inside were half a dozen VHS tapes, each with masking tape labels written in faded marker. Birthdays, school plays, a camping trip. And one, in uneven block letters. Birthday, August 95. The moment he saw the date, his pulse slowed in his ears. He didn't own a VCR anymore. Hardly anyone did. But curiosity became something heavier, a weight between his ribs, and he found himself at a pawn shop 2 towns over that same afternoon, paying $20 for a dusty player that smelled faintly of cigarette smoke. By the time he threaded the tape into the machine, the sun was low. The apartment was quiet, except for the occasional rush of cars outside his window. The screen came alive with static, then color. He expected to watch with a kind of bittersweet detachment, maybe even to smile at the clumsy innocence of old home videos. And at first, that's what it was. Harold's slow pans of the yard, the flicker of candlelight on frosting, children's voices layered over the rustle of leaves. But then, 37 minutes in, the tape skipped. It wasn't the kind of interruption you'd expect. No full cut to black, no loud static burst. The image just jumped, the way a heartbeat skips a beat. One moment, the camera was fixed on a group of people near the table. The next, it was focused on her. Alone. Standing by the elm tree. She wasn't smiling now. Her hands were clasped loosely in front of her, her gaze fixed on something, or someone, just beyond the fence. There was no sound. Not even the ambient noise of the party. The silence on the tape was almost total, broken only by the faint hiss of magnetic playback. And then, as suddenly as it appeared, the scene was gone. The audio and color snapped back, the party resuming mid-laughter as though nothing had happened. He rewound it. Watched again. The skip was still there. It didn't feel like an accident. It felt deliberate, like something had been lifted out and replaced with this short, silent fragment. Over the next hour, he combed through the footage and found more. At 1842, a shot of the cake on the table. Then a cut to a blurry too-close image of the fence slats. The camera lingers there, unmoving, for 4 full seconds. In the gap between 2 slats, you can just make out the curve of a shadow, a shape too tall to be a child, too still to be anyone from the party. At 52:19, the image abruptly changes to the inside of a dim hallway. It's brief, only a second or two, and the camera seems to be moving as if held at chest height. The wallpaper is pale, patterned faintly with flowers, but water-stained in the corners. There's no one in frame. And then at 1 hour 7 minutes and 3 seconds, what would later be called the final frame. But he doesn't know that yet. He called Harold that night. The old neighbor's voice was thinner now, weaker with age, but still warm. Harold remembered filming the party. Remembered the elm tree, the cake, the breeze that kept pulling at the tablecloth. But when the brother asked him about the strange clips, the silent shot of her by the fence, the hallway, the fence slats, Harold went quiet for several seconds. "I never filmed that," he said finally. "Not 1 second of it. I don't even know where that hallway is." That was the moment the warmth of memory curdled. The tape was no longer a keepsake. It was evidence, though of what neither man could say. The brother replayed the silent clip of her again and again. In the background of her profile, just beyond the fence, there's a patch of sunlight that seems to pulse faintly. Not a glare, not a glitch, but as though the light itself was bending. And the way she's standing, it's like she's listening. Not to the party. Not to anyone in the yard. To something on the other side. From here, his relationship with the tape changes. He doesn't watch it casually anymore. He pauses, rewinds, plays in slow motion, advancing frame by frame until the image buckles under the strain. The VHS format was never meant for this kind of scrutiny. The colors bleed, the lines break apart, and sometimes the act of rewinding seems to make the strange scenes longer, as though they're stretching to meet his eyes. The section closes on a single detail. In the silent clip by the elm tree, her lips move. Only once. A single word. It's impossible to hear, there's no audio at all, but in the grain of the tape, he swears she mouths the word back. It happens at 1 hour, 7 minutes, and 3 seconds into the recording. The moment isn't announced. No flicker of static to warn you, no sudden audio spike. The party is mid-motion. People laughing, plates being passed, the hum of a lawnmower somewhere down the street. And then it isn't. The image changes without a visible cut. 1 frame, and the backyard is gone. In its place, a narrow hallway. Dim light. The lens tilts slightly downward, as though the person holding the camera has just shifted their grip. The floorboards are warped. Their varnish dulled by years of wear. At the far end of the hallway, just before the darkness swallows it, there is movement. And then he is there. The man's face fills almost the entire frame, closer than is comfortable to watch. There is no time to adjust, no time to read context. His features rush forward like the moment before a collision. His skin is pale, not the washed-out pale of VHS color loss, but flat, the kind of pallor that feels deliberate, as though all warmth has been drained from it. His eyes are dark. Not just in color, but in depth. The black doesn't stop at the pupils. It swallows the iris entirely. They're not wide in shock or narrow in anger. They are still, holding, looking into the camera in a way that feels less like recognition and more like measurement. His mouth is closed, but the set of his lips is wrong. Not crooked, not sneering, but fixed with a tension that suggests the effort of holding something back. There's no breath fogging the lens, no sound of breathing at all. Just the faint electric hiss of the tape itself. When the brother first saw it, he froze. The moment is less than half a second long, but when he replayed it over and over, it began to stretch. Every time, he found some new detail to haunt him. The background is blurred, but not indistinct. Behind the man, there's a window, a small one square with a single pane cracked diagonally. Outside that glass, there's nothing but white. Not snow, not daylight exactly. Just white. As though the world beyond has been erased. And in the lower corner of the frame, there's something else. A faint curve. A partial reflection in the glass. Not strong enough to be called an image, but enough to suggest shape. At first, the brother thought it was just a trick of the light. But after hours of studying it, he was certain it was a shoulder. Narrow. Sloped. The kind of shape that matched his sister. He sent stills of the frame to everyone he could think of. Family, friends, former neighbors. No one recognized the man. Not a single person claimed to have seen him before. And yet, he didn't look like a stranger in the sense of being anonymous. His face had the unsettling quality of someone you should remember but don't. Like catching the eyes of a person in a dream you'd forgotten. Harold, when shown the image, went quiet. The brother remembers the way the old man's hand shook slightly as he held the photograph. "That's not from my camera," Harold said finally. His voice had dropped into a whisper. "That's not my footage." The deeper the brother stared, the less certain he felt about what he was seeing. The man's features began to seem inconsistent. In one viewing, the cheekbones felt sharper. In another, the jaw heavier. In some frames, the eyes sat closer together. In others, farther apart. He wondered if this was just the degradation of old analog tape, the way a paused VHS can warp and breathe on its own. But the changes felt intentional, coordinated, almost as though the face wasn't fixed. When a digital archivist friend offered to run the footage through enhancement software, the results didn't make things clearer. They made them worse. The computer reconstructed the image in layers. First pass, the man's face sharpened. Second pass, the background smoothed of noise. Third pass, an anomaly, a faint second outline of a face overlaying the first. The two images didn't match. The eyes in the second were slightly lower, the mouth more relaxed, the skin tone subtly different. It was as though two separate recordings had been pressed together, each bleeding into the other. The archivist had no explanation. Could be double exposure, he offered weakly. But VHS couldn't do that. Not like this. The brother became obsessed with the idea that this single frame, this impossibly short moment, was the hinge on which the entire disappearance turned. The rest of the footage felt like build-up, like shadows circling a door. This was the door opening. He began to dream about it. Not nightmares, not exactly. In the dreams, he was holding the camera himself, moving through the hallway toward the man. The air would feel cold, too cold, and the floor beneath his feet would creak once, then fall silent. The man wouldn't move until the brother reached him. And then, in perfect stillness, he would speak a single word. The brother could never remember upon waking. Every morning after, he would load the tape and watch the frame again, half expecting the man's mouth to move this time. And there was one final detail, one that he told no one at first. On his 10th or 12th viewing of the frame, just before the static swallowed it, he noticed the man's gaze shift. Not toward the lens. Not toward him. But slightly to the side, as though watching something approach from just out of view. And for a split second, the faintest curve of a smile. The still image became a map. The missing woman's brother printed it in half a dozen sizes. A standard sheet for files, a smaller one that fit into his wallet, and a large grainy blow-up that he pinned to the wall above his desk. Around it, he began to tack notes. Dates, places, names, each connected with red thread that ran like veins across the plaster. The man in the frame had no name. So he gave him one, the stranger. The first step was the obvious one. Show the image to the people who'd been there that day. The process was excruciating. Many of the guests had moved away. Some had died. The ones who remained remembered the party warmly, but when shown the photograph, each shook their head. One woman frowned at it for a long time before speaking. Feels like I've seen him in something else. A commercial, maybe. Or a yearbook. But no, I don't know him. Her tone was uncertain, like the way you might speak when a half-forgotten dream pulls at you. The brother reached out to the county sheriff's office. They ran the image against their old case files and mugshots, but the match list came back empty. He tried missing persons databases, both state and federal. Nothing. The FBI's VICAP system flagged no hits. The face was a ghost in every official archive. An officer who'd been a young deputy back in '95 looked at the still and muttered, "If he was around back then, I'd have remembered. But I don't like the look in his eyes." He didn't elaborate. Next came the amateur investigators. The brother posted the image to online forums dedicated to cold cases, to subreddits where users dissected every pixel of unsolved mysteries. The thread filled quickly with theories. The face is a composite, a splicing of two or more people. It's a case of pareidolia, not a man at all, but a trick of shadows. It's an interlaced bleed from a different tape, recorded over the original. But some replies were different. One user claimed they'd seen the man before, in a news segment from the late 1980s about a flood, 2 states over. They describe him standing in the background of a rescue shot, looking directly into the camera. When the brother tried to find the clip, the station's archive had no record of it. Another person swore they'd spotted the face in a photograph from a county fair in 1977. In the background of a candid shot of 2 children with balloons, a man in a dark coat stood, half turned toward the lens. His features were slightly different, but the eyes were the same. The brother began to think of the search less as looking for a man and more as tracing an echo. The stranger's face seemed to drift through time without ever planting roots. Late one night, Harold called. His voice was strained. I think I might have filmed him before." They met the next morning at Harold's small, dim living room, where boxes of unlabeled VHS tapes lined the shelves. Harold moved slowly now, his hand shaking slightly as he loaded one into the player. The footage was from 1993, the town's annual summer fair. Colorful tents lined the main street, children clutched cotton candy, and a brass band played from a makeshift stage. Harold's camera moved lazily, catching faces in the crowd. And then there he was, the same man, standing in the background near the carousel, watching. The frame was clearer this time, his features less distorted. He looked older or younger than in the birthday tape. It was hard to tell, but the way he stared into the lens was the same, still measuring, unblinking. The brother's stomach tightened. The fair footage was 2 years before his sister vanished. "Do you remember seeing him that day?" he asked. Harold shook his head slowly. "No. If I had, I would have remembered. He's not the kind of face you forget." Armed with 2 confirmed appearances, the brother expanded his search. He combed through the town's archives, requesting any footage, parades, school events, church gatherings, from the mid-'80s onward. The archivist was polite but confused. "You're looking for someone who might not even be alive." But as he dug, he found more. In a 1989 high school graduation video, a man stood by the fence at the edge of the football field. The lighting was poor, and the camera never quite focused on him, but the silhouette was unmistakable. In a 1981 home movie of a fishing trip, he appeared for less than 2 seconds in the reflection of a bait shop window. It was as though he'd been orbiting the town for decades, always present, never acknowledged. The brothers' wall of photographs and notes grew until the thread lines formed a web dense enough to cast shadows in his apartment. His friends stopped visiting. His job became secondary. Meals went untouched. Nights became loops of rewinding and frame stepping through the same few seconds of tape, until the sound of VHS static lived in his bones. Some nights, he thought he saw the man in new places, the edge of a news broadcast, the corner of a family photo on his desk. He'd look closer and the face would be gone. The section closes with a quiet, chilling moment. The brother comes home one evening to find the VHS player still running. He doesn't remember leaving it on. The TV screen is black, except for the faintest flickering outline of a face. It's not the final frame from the party. It's not from the fair footage. It's something new. And this time, the man isn't looking into the lens. He's looking just past it, toward something behind the viewer. It started with late nights. Just an extra hour here, another there. Watching the tapes, freeze-framing the man's face until his features burned into the back of his eyelids. But soon, nights became mornings. The brother's sleep schedule broke apart entirely. Not from insomnia, but because he couldn't bring himself to stop. The apartment began to change. The wall where the photographs hung swelled until it claimed half the living room. VHS cassettes stacked in uneven towers along the baseboards, their black plastic cases worn to dull gray at the corners. He marked each with dates in red ink, his handwriting growing tighter and more frantic as the months passed. On his desk, an old CRT television hummed constantly. The screen was almost never off. He kept the tapes running in loops, not just the birthday party, but every scrap of footage he'd found with the stranger's face in it. Fairgrounds, fishing trips, school parades, even grainy news footage that might have been coincidence, or might not. The man was everywhere and nowhere. Friends stopped calling. At first, they'd checked in, texts, voicemails, casual visits. But conversations with him were no longer about anything else. Every story, every remark, circled back to the tapes. Back to him. Eventually, people stopped trying. His phone calls went unanswered. His knocks on doors were met with excuses. It didn't matter. The tapes were company enough. The breakthrough came, if you could call it that, on a Tuesday at 3:14 a.m. He'd been playing the 1993 fair footage again, running it frame by frame through a digitizing program. The carousel scene, the one where the stranger stood at the edge of the frame, had always felt incomplete, like there was something just outside the visible area. And then, on the 40-second pass, he saw it, reflected in one of the carousel's mirrors. Small, imperfect, warped by the glass, was a second face. A woman's. Her head tilted as if she were listening to something. The shape of her jaw, the line of her hair. It was his sister. She was looking directly at the stranger. From that moment, his focus shifted. It wasn't enough to identify the man. He had to know what passed between them in those stolen glances, those moments just outside the frame. He began to see connections everywhere. In the fishing trip footage, he noticed a shadow that fell over the bait shop's doorway just before the stranger's reflection appeared. In the 1989 graduation video, the man's head turned not toward the ceremony but toward a cluster of people, where, if you paused just right, you could catch the back of his sister's head. But the more he found, the less linear the timeline became. The appearances weren't following the normal flow of years. Sometimes the stranger looked younger in later footage. Sometimes older in earlier clips. It was as if he wasn't moving through time the way the rest of them were. Sleep deprivation set in like a fever. He began waking in his chair, with the static still hissing from the TV. The shapes on the screen would linger behind his eyes after he blinked. Ghost images that didn't dissolve when he looked away. One night, he dreamed of the hallway from the final frame. This time, the camera wasn't in his hands. He was in the hallway, standing at the far end. The floorboards groaned beneath his feet as he moved forward. The stranger was there, but his head was turned slightly, as if listening for something in the darkness behind him. When the stranger finally looked at him, it wasn't recognition in his expression. It was welcome. He woke drenched in sweat, the VHS still running in the player. But something was wrong. The tape was playing the birthday footage, but the sequence was off. It wasn't the normal flow of events. The camera was moving through empty rooms now, places that hadn't been in the original recording. And then, without warning, the stranger appeared. Not in the hallway. Not even looking at the lens. He was standing in the middle of the backyard alone at night. A scene the brother had never filmed, never found, never seen. The man turned his head slightly, as though hearing the brother's breath. And then the tape snapped back to the party mid-song, as if nothing had happened. From then on, the brother couldn't shake the feeling that the stranger was no longer just in the tapes. He caught glimpses in his apartment window at night, not the man himself but his stillness. That absence of movement that the human eye recognizes instantly, the way we can sense when a predator is watching. Some mornings, when he woke, the VCR clock would be reset, blinking 12 o'clock. Tapes he hadn't touched in weeks would be sitting out on the coffee table. It wasn't just an investigation anymore. It was a visitation. The section ends with him sitting in the dim light of the TV glow, the static brushing against the walls like a low tide. His voice is barely audible, half to himself, half to something unseen. "You're not just in the footage, are you?" It came from a place you'd never expect, the back room of the town's tiny library. A retired schoolteacher named Mrs. Keller had been clearing out her attic when she found a box of old VHS tapes, most of them school plays and community events from the early 90s. She didn't own a player anymore, so she brought them to the library's local history section, thinking they might belong in the archives. The librarian called the brother the same day. "One of these I think you'll want to see." The tape was labeled in fading blue ink, "Town Fair, June 1993. It began innocently enough. A wide shot of the fairground, rows of food stalls under striped canopies, the Ferris wheel turning slowly against a pale summer sky, children's laughter bright over the tinny music of the carousel. The camera belonged to someone with a steady hand, each shot framed deliberately, no quick pans or jittery zooms. You could almost smell the fried dough and hear the faint metallic clatter of the ring toss. For 10 minutes, nothing unusual happened. The footage was pure nostalgia. Families leaning over counters for lemonade, teenagers daring each other onto the rides, little kids tugging at their parents' hands. And then, at the 11-minute mark, the camera passed over a crowd gathered near the main stage, and froze. He was there. Not in the background this time. Not caught by accident, not blurred in motion. He was standing still, directly in the open, no more than 20 feet from the lens. His face was turned toward the camera. Not aggressively, not smiling, just present. Still as stone while the crowd moved around him. He was wearing a dark shirt, buttoned up to the collar, sleeves rolled neatly at the wrists. The summer light should have washed out the details, but somehow his features seemed sharper than anyone else's in the frame. The same deep, still eyes. The same pale skin. And that same unreadable tension in the mouth, as if he were holding something just behind his teeth. The camera stayed on him for a full 5 seconds. Long enough to feel unnatural. Long enough to feel intentional. The brother leaned closer to the library's small monitor, his pulse quickening. He hit pause, rewound, played it again. The man never looked away, never blinked. And then, in the corner of the frame, something caught his eye. A movement behind the stranger. A small figure slipping between two vendor stalls. A figure with the same long hair, the same slight frame as his sister. 2 years before she would disappear. She wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking at him. The brother's breath caught. He let the tape run forward, but the camera turned to follow the carousel, and she was gone. So was the stranger. Not even in the next wide shot of the fairground, as if they'd both stepped out of the crowd in the space of a heartbeat. Mrs. Keller, when asked if she remembered either of them, shook her head slowly. There were hundreds of people there that day. But that man. No. I don't think I'd have forgotten him. The find changed everything. Until now, the brother had believed the 1995 birthday footage was the origin point. The first time the stranger had been caught on tape in connection with his sister. But this was 2 years earlier. And this wasn't a glimpse in the corner of a frame. This was the stranger in full view, standing in the heart of a busy event. His gaze locked on whoever was holding the camera. The implication was chilling. The disappearance hadn't begun in 1995. It had been moving toward that moment for years. He digitized the fair footage, slowed it down, frame-stepped through the crowd. That's when he found something else, something that made his stomach tighten. In one shot of the cotton candy stand, far from where the stranger had been, the camera panned past a group of children. For just 2 frames, barely a tenth of a second, a figure passed behind them. The clothing was different, the hairstyle shorter, but the face was unmistakable. The stranger was there too. 2 places. Same event. Same day. The brother took the tape to the archivist who'd worked on the birthday footage. The archivist confirmed what he'd feared. This isn't editing. These are continuous shots. If that's the same guy, he was in 2 places within seconds of each other. The archivist offered other explanations. A twin, a look-alike, but his tone lacked conviction. That night, the brother dreamed again. He was standing in the middle of the fairground. The stalls were empty, the ride still, the music slowed to a low, warped drone. The stranger was there across the midway, just as in the footage. Staring, hands still at his sides. But now there was no crowd between them. Only open space. And when the brother looked away for half a second and turned back, the stranger was standing directly in front of him. The section closes on a slow zoom into the paused fair footage. The stranger's face framed perfectly in the crowd, the faint outline of the sister's figure just over his shoulder. The grain of the tape makes the image breathe, each pixel shifting like something alive. The brother whispers into the quiet library room, though no one's there to hear him. He was already here. The first time the brother watched the birthday tape, it was a memory. The second time it was evidence. Now, after the fair footage, it became something else entirely. A hunting ground. He started from the very first frame this time, with a notepad and a pen, watching as though the party were happening in front of him again. Every laugh, every glance, every shift in posture was no longer innocent. Everything was suspect. The opening shot of Harold's feet on the grass. Before, he'd thought nothing of it. Now, he noticed the faint shadow crossing the frame from right to left, moving too slowly to be a guest walking by, too far away from the tree to be Harold's own. The moment under the elm, when his sister looked toward the street. Before, he'd dismissed it as curiosity. Now, he watched the exact angle of her eyes and traced it across the fence to the thin gap in the boards, the same kind of gap through which the stranger's shadow had been glimpsed in an earlier splice. The birthday song sequence, once charming, now bristled with oddness. At the edge of the crowd, behind a cluster of neighbors, a man stood, half-turned toward the fence. His head tilted slightly as though listening. The frame never caught his face, but the line of his neck, the set of his shoulders, looked uncomfortably familiar. In the background, someone's hand slipped briefly into view. Pale, long-fingered, resting against the fence slats from the outside. It was there for less than a second before sliding out of frame. He catalogued every reaction from his sister. The way her laughter would occasionally stutter and die mid-sentence. The way she seemed to position herself so that the elm tree was always at her back, as though she didn't want her shadow to fall where she couldn't see it. Most telling of all was the final 20 minutes of footage, the part before the hallway cut and the final frame. The camera drifts lazily, catching the usual party chatter, until Harold points it toward the far corner of the yard. There, by the gate, is his sister, speaking to someone just out of view. Her tone is low, her expression unreadable. Every so often she glances back toward the house, like she's checking to see if anyone's watching. At one point, her head dips slightly, as though listening to a reply. Her shoulders shift, tightening, before she glances toward Harold's lens. For the briefest moment, her eyes widen, not with recognition but with warning. The next second, the tape skips. The brother froze that frame, replayed it again and again, until he could almost convince himself she was mouthing a word. Not help. Not stop. Something quieter. A name, maybe. Or just a single syllable meant only for the person on the other side of the lens. He compared the timeline of the birthday footage to the fair tape. It didn't make sense. If the stranger had been watching her 2 years earlier, why wait until now? Why appear so plainly in the last seconds? Unless, and this was the thought that made his stomach turn, the final frame wasn't a mistake in the recording. It was the point. That theory changed everything. The party wasn't just a backdrop for her disappearance. It was a performance, and the stranger had been part of it. The friendly neighbor with his camera, the warm daylight, the laughter. All of it a kind of stage dressing. And if that was true, then maybe the hallway and the final frame weren't spliced in later at all. Maybe they were always there. Maybe Harold had been filming exactly what he thought he was filming, and the world on the tape had shifted underneath him. The brother took his notes to the sheriff's office again, laying out the fair footage, the fishing trip reflection, the birthday anomalies. The deputy listened, nodded, but when it was over, he closed the file slowly. We can't pursue a suspect who doesn't exist in any records. The brother left with the sickening realization that the investigation was now his alone. Back in his apartment, he projected the birthday footage on the wall, running it side by side with the fair tape. He slowed them both to half speed, then quarter speed, matching moments of her glances and his appearances. The result was unbearable. In both events, the stranger always positioned himself in a direct sight line to her, even when the camera didn't notice. It was as if they were the only two people in a room no one else could see. The section ends on a detail so small it would be easy to miss. In the final minute before the hallway cut, as Harold's camera sweeps past the fence, a faint sliver of glass catches the light. Behind it, distorted but unmistakable, is a pale reflection, the same cracked pane window that appears in the final frame. It shouldn't be there. But it is. The brother had run out of places to search in the present. Police records, school archives, home videos. All roads ended in the same dead air. So he turned backward, digging into the town's history, its stories and the rumors that had survived long after their truth had rotted away. At first, it felt pointless. The old newspaper clippings in the library smelled of mildew and told him nothing but the predictable. Births, harvests, the occasional scandal. But as he read further back, into the 1950s, the 1930s, the turn of the century, a pattern began to emerge. It started as whispers in the margins, accounts of a quiet man who appeared before tragedies. Not a criminal, not a suspect. Just a figure seen by someone who, in the days or weeks after, would lose something precious. In 1974, before the fire at the mill, a worker claimed a pale man had been standing on the bridge at dusk, staring upriver. In 1952, 2 days before a boy vanished on his way home from school, his mother said he'd mentioned a man in the alley with the wrong eyes. In 1911, before a woman drowned in the river, the shopkeeper swore she'd been speaking to a stranger in a dark coat at the edge of the market. The brother started to mark these sightings on a timeline. Every 20 to 30 years, there was a small cluster of them. Always vague, always brief. Never enough to make a formal accusation, but enough to weave a thread through decades. He brought the list to the town's oldest resident, a woman named Mrs. Elders, who was nearly 90 and spoke in a voice like paper turning in the wind. When he mentioned the final frame, she didn't ask what he meant. She only nodded. "You've found the borrowed face," she said. She told him the story the way some people talk about weather, matter of fact, without any performance. The borrowed face, she said, was a figure that didn't belong to any time. He could walk into a crowd in 1920 or 2020 and look like he had always been there. His face was never quite the same twice, but always close enough that if you'd seen him before, you'd feel the echo in your bones. He appeared before endings, not always deaths, not always crimes, but moments where someone's life was about to fold in on itself. Sometimes he watched from far away, sometimes from inches. And sometimes, she said, he would appear in photographs or films, even when no one had been there. He's not in the picture because you filmed him, she said. You filmed him because he was already in the picture. The brother pressed her for more. What did he want? Why show himself at all? She only shook her head. It's not for us to understand. Maybe it's not for him either. He dug deeper, looking beyond the town's borders. The pattern wasn't unique. Other towns had their own names for the same figure. The waiting man, the one who stands, the listener. The descriptions were always slightly different, but the eyes were always the same, dark, still, and heavy, as if they were carrying more years than the rest of the face. One story from a neighboring county chilled him most. In 1968, a young woman disappeared after a carnival. Weeks later, when her parents developed a roll of film from that night, they found one frame that didn't match any of the others. It was a blurry shot of a narrow hallway, lit from the far end. In the middle of the frame was a man with still eyes, his head tilted slightly, the exact posture of the stranger in the birthday tape. Skeptics online had their own explanations. They called it apophenia, the human tendency to see patterns in random noise. To them, the stranger was a trick of the light, a product of low-resolution VHS, bleeding shapes together until the brain invented a face. But the brother didn't believe it. Because no amount of coincidence could explain the feeling that came every time he paused the tape at the final frame, the way the air in the room seemed to get heavier, as if the image itself were watching back. He tried to share the folklore theory with the archivist who'd helped him earlier. The archivist listened politely, then said, "You realize if you keep chasing myths, you're going to lose sight of the facts." But to the brother, the facts and the myths were starting to feel like the same thing. Because whether the stranger was a man, a legend, or something that lived between the two, the truth was constant. His sister had seen him before she vanished. And she hadn't looked away. The section closes with the brother sitting in the dark, the only light coming from the TV screen. On it, the paused final frame flickers, the grain shifting slightly over the still eyes. His notebook lies open beside him, the words "borrowed face" underlined twice. He whispers the phrase as if saying it might give him some kind of hold over it. But the eyes in the frame don't move. They don't need to. It was Harold's idea. "One last time," he said over the phone, his voice brittle like paper left too long in the sun. "If you keep watching it alone, you're going to lose yourself in it. Let me be there. We'll put it to rest." The brother hesitated. He had told himself the same thing before, that each viewing would be the last. But there was always something left to see, some detail he hadn't noticed. And lately, the feeling had grown worse. The stranger wasn't just in the footage anymore. He was somewhere closer, just outside the frame of his own life. He agreed. They met in Harold's living room. Curtains drawn. The air thick with the smell of dust and old upholstery. Harold's VCR was an older model, heavy and scarred, the kind with physical buttons that clicked like typewriter keys. The TV screen, a convex square, hummed faintly in the dim light. The brother held the tape in both hands for a long moment before sliding it into the player. The mechanical thunk felt final, like closing a door that wouldn't open again. "No pausing this time," Harold said. "No rewinds. We watch it as it is." The tape rolled. At first, it was exactly as it had always been. Warm August light over the yard. Folding tables under the elm. The birthday song, slightly off-key. They sat in silence. Only the steady hiss of the VHS and the occasional click of Harold's throat. The brother forced himself not to dart his eyes ahead, not to anticipate the cuts and skips. He watched his sister as if for the first time, the tilt of her head, the way her fingers drummed absently against the paper cup, the half-smile she gave when someone passed by with a plate of food. For a moment, grief pushed the mystery aside. Then came the first skip. Her. Alone. By the fence. Hands clasped. Head tilted. Silent. The same faint pulsing of light through the slats. But this time something was different. The image felt clearer, like the air had been wiped clean between her and the lens. He glanced at Harold, but the old man's expression didn't change. The party resumed. More laughter. More idle conversation. The tension in the brother's chest tightened with every passing minute, as the tape inched toward the point he both dreaded and needed to see. The hallway appeared. Dim. Narrow. The floorboards warped. And then, the final frame. The stranger. The stillness of him was exactly as the brother remembered. But there was something else now, something he had never noticed in all the years of freeze-framing and magnifying. In the cracked pane window behind him, the reflection was no longer faint. It was her. His sister. Not as she had been at the party, but older. The lines of her face sharper. Her hair different. She was looking directly into the lens, not at the stranger. Her mouth moved once, forming a word he couldn't hear. The brother's breath caught. "Do you see that?" he whispered. Harold said nothing. He was leaning forward, eyes fixed on the screen. The image held for just a fraction longer than it ever had before. Long enough for the brother to register something terrifying. The reflection of his sister wasn't just behind the stranger. It was standing slightly to his left, inside the hallway. And then the tape snapped to static. The brother turned to Harold. She was there. She was right there. "Did you see it?" Harold's gaze was still on the screen. His mouth moved, but the first word caught in his throat. When he finally spoke, it was soft. "No." They sat in silence as the static hissed on, filling the room like white wind. The brother reached for the remote, ready to rewind despite their agreement. But when he pressed the button, the player whirred for a second and stopped, as if the tape had reached its end. He ejected it, turned it over in his hands. The reels inside weren't at the end at all. They were back near the beginning. That night, alone in his apartment, the brother tried to watch again. But when he pressed play, the footage was wrong. Not the party. Not the fair. The tape showed the hallway immediately, as if the rest had been stripped away. The stranger stood there, unmoving. And this time, the reflection in the cracked pane window wasn't his sister. It disappeared quietly. No breaking, no overturned drawers, no sign that anyone had even entered the apartment. The brother woke one morning to find the space where the VHS had sat, the same place it had occupied for months, empty. He checked the floor first, then the desk, then every shelf and box. He pulled open the closet, dug through the stacks of other tapes. It was gone. The strange part wasn't just that it was missing. It was that nothing else was. The VCR still sat on the desk. The other tapes still leaned in their crooked towers against the wall. His notes, his photographs, his red thread map, all untouched. Only that one tape was gone. He called Harold, his voice tight. "You still have the digital copy, don't you?" Harold asked. He did. Several, in fact. Stored on hard drives and cloud folders. The thought gave him a moment's relief, until he tried to watch one. The first viewing was familiar enough. The party unfolded as it always had, the warm, sunlit images blurring at the edges. But when the tape reached the final frame, something was wrong. The stranger's face was the same. The cracked pane window was the same. But the reflection behind him, the one that had once been his sister, was gone. In its place was only the faint suggestion of movement, like someone stepping back into shadow. He tried a second copy. This time the reflection was there, but not as she had been. Her head was turned away, her hair different, her stance unfamiliar. The moment felt shorter, the static arriving a fraction too soon. By the fourth viewing, even the stranger looked altered. The jawline slightly sharper. The eyes set deeper in their sockets. The changes were subtle, but enough to make the brother feel that the man in the image was not quite the same man anymore. The more he watched, the less the footage seemed fixed. Scenes he knew by heart began to shift in length. A guest at the party stood in a different position. A child's laugh came at the wrong time. Once, in the silent clip of his sister by the fence, he thought he saw a faint pale shape between the slats. Not the stranger, but someone shorter, standing completely still. The copies weren't preserving the tape. They were changing with it. He started to wonder if the physical cassette had been the only constant, a kind of anchor holding the images in place. Without it, the recordings drifted like memory itself, reshaping each time they were played. And then the dreams returned. In them, he was always standing in the hallway from the final frame. But now there was no sense of approaching. The stranger and he stood side by side, both facing the cracked pane window. Outside was nothing but white. The stranger would glance at him once briefly, then turn his gaze back to the glass. And in the reflection, the brother would see someone else watching them both. Weeks passed. The brother stopped trying to stabilize the digital copies. He stopped showing the footage to anyone. He told himself it was to preserve what was left, but deep down he knew it was because he no longer trusted what he'd see next. One night he walked past the desk and caught sight of the paused image on the screen. The stranger in the hallway. Motionless. He could have sworn the eyes weren't looking at the lens anymore. They were looking just off to the side at something outside the frame. The documentary closes not with a revelation, but with an absence. The narrator's voice returns, low and even. There are stories that end when the last page turns, the last reel spins, the last frame fades. But this is not one of them. Because a story that changes every time you look at it is never really over. On the screen, the final frame lingers, not frozen, but breathing with the soft flicker of digital grain. For a moment, it almost seems like the man's lips part just enough to form a shape. And then, the image cuts to black. No credits. Just the sound of static. And in that static, if you listen long enough, the faint impression of a voice. Not speaking. Just waiting.